Be'ezus Hashem, we're starting today Sefer Kedushah. As we mentioned in Rambam Meduyakim, in Frankel Rambam and other Rambams, the Rambam seems in the beginning of every Sefer, first he mentions all the halachas that are in the Sefer, then he says all the mitzvahs which are in all those halachas, and then he starts again with the particular halacha, and then again the mitzvahs. So in Sefer Kedushah, for example, he would mention all the halachas of Isuri Bia and all the halachas of Machalos Asuris and all the halachas of Hilchas Shchita, and then again he would start Hilchas Isuri Bia and mention all the halachas. We'll just say the way it's in other Rambams, the way it's in many Tfusim, that we just mention the halachas and then the halachas of the mitzvahs of that first halacha. B'Shem Hashem Keileilam Pa'amai. The Rambam starts every sefer with a pasuk. Pa'amai hachin bin rasecha v'al tashtel bi kolovin. This is prepare my steps with bin rasecha, with your words, with teiraces. V'al tashtel bi kolovin. We're talking about, we're worrying about bias asuris, machalos asuris. So that's pa'amai hachin bin rasecha v'al tashtel bi kolovin. Sefer Chamishi v'u Sefer Kedushah. Hilches of Sholish v'zeu Siduran. Hilchas Isuri Bia, Hilchas Machalos Asuris, Hilchas Shchita. Hilchas Isuri Bia yesh b'chololon sheva u'shleishim mitzvahs, mitzvahs hasei achas, u'shleishim v'sheish mitzvahs leisasa. So generally, the Isuri Bia, the chlavim, there's one mitzvah, the mitzvah of a Kohen Gadol marrying a psula. That's a mitzvah hasei. V'zehu proton aleph, shalei love al echaim, beis shalei love al eshes av. Now, there's, by the Isuri Lavim, the Rambam says, Shalei Lisa. All the Isuri Lavim, when there's a Isur Bia, the Isur Lav, so the Isur is, you only get Malchus if you got married and there was a Bia. With the exception of Almana L'Kohen Gadol. For Almana L'Kohen Gadol, you're Chayiv Malchus on the Bia itself, without getting married. Masha'inkim Chayiv Krisus, you can't get married. Kedusha is not Tefus. So over there, it's only Shalei Lavi. That's Aleph, Shalei Lavi Alheim. Beis, Shalei Lavi Al Eshesav, a woman that was married to your father, even though she's not your mother. And Gimel, Shalei Livel Oches. I'm not sure, I don't understand, I don't really know why. Sometimes the Rambam writes Shalei Lavi and sometimes Shalei Livel. It's the same idea. Why by Aim and Eshesav he said Lavi, and over here he says Shalei Livel. I'll call upon Gimel, Shalei Livel Oches. Dalid Shalei Bas Eshesav. Now, Bas Eshesav doesn't mean your father's wife's daughter, because she's not related to you. If she's not your sister, your father married a woman. That woman had a daughter, so you're allowed to marry her. She's not your sister. Shalei Bas Eshesav means it's your father's daughter, so really she's your sister. But normally you're not allowed to marry your sister. We learned before Shalei Oches. However, if this daughter, this sister is also, she's your sister because your father married a woman and then he had this daughter. So if your father lived with a woman and had a daughter, so then she's your sister. And then there's a Isser, Shaliv Achis. But if it's a sister through a marriage that your father had, it was a Bas Eshesav, so then there's two Isurim. There's a Isser Mitzad Achis, and there's another Isser Mitzad Bas Eshesav. The Rambam is going to say it in Peirik Beis. I'll call upon Dalit Shalei Bas Eshesav, Hey Shalei Bas Haben, Vav Shalei Habas, your own daughter. Zayin, the Bas Haben is your granddaughter, and Shalei Bas Habas, another seer of a granddaughter. Ches Shalei Lisa Isha Ubita, so you're not allowed to marry a woman and her daughter. And Tes Shalei Lisa Isha Bas Beno, or Shalei Lisa Isha Ubas Bita. So you're not allowed to marry your own daughter or any of your granddaughters. You're not allowed to marry your wife's daughter or your wife's granddaughters. You're not allowed to live with your wife's daughter or your wife's granddaughters. Yud Aleph Shalei Livel Aches Av. Yud Beis Shalei Livel Aches Eim, that's an aunt. Yud Gimel Shalei Livel Eishes Achi Av. Livel Eishes Achi Av. Yud Daled Shalei Livel Eishes Haben. Tezvav Shalei Livel Eishes Ach. Tezayin Shalei Livel Aches Ishtei. Yud Zayin Shalei Lishkav in Behema. Yud Ches Shalei Savi Isha Behema Aleha. Yud Tes Shalei Lishkav im Zocher. Chof Shalei legalis ervis av. Shalei legalis ervis av is also included in loylishkav im zocher. But if it's the father, so then it's two isurim. This first of all, it's ad lishkav im zocher, and also shalei legalis ervis av. Now there's a chafal of shalei legalis ervis achiyav. So again, achiyav is the isur for shalei lishkav im zocher, but since he's achiyav, so there's an additional isur of shalei lishkav shalei legalis ervis achiyav. Shechav beis shalei livel eshesish. Chav Gimel Shalei Livel Nida, Chav Dalet Shalei Lischatin Ba'akum, not to get married to a goy, to a goya. Chav Hey Shalei Yave Ameni Umiyavi Bekal Hashem, that's a lav. Chav Vav, which over there it's a lav only when there's kedushin and there's a bia. Chav Vav Shalei Laharchik Der Shlishi Mitzri Milavi Bakol. Chav Zayin Shalei Laharchik Der Shlishi Ademi Milavi Bakol. Chav Ches Shalei Yavi Mamzer Bakol. Again, it's the Isser of Nesuyin and Bia. Chav Tes Shalei Yavi Saris Bakol. Lamed Shalei L'Saris Zocher. Afilu Behei Mechayev Ve'ef. Shalei L'Saris Zocher. Afilu Behei Mechayev Ve'ef. And the Rambam is putting it in Nesuri Bia because it's something which prevents Bia. Lamed Aleph Shalei Yisa Ken Gadol Almana. And Lamed Bey Shalei Yivil Ken Gadol Almana. Afilu B'lei Nesuyin. That's a Chidush. That it's a lav, and there's an Isser Bia even without Nesuyim. Lamed Gimel, Sheyisa Ken Gadol Psula B'nariseh, that's the Essa of marrying a Psula. And Lamed Dalet Sheyisa Koyin Grusha. Lamed Hey Sheyisa Zoyna. Lamed Vav Sheyisa Chalola. And Lamed Zayin Sheyikra of Odom La'achas Mikol Ha'aroyes, Afal Pi Shelibal, Ubir Mitzvuselu Beprokemelu Pede Krishi. Halacha Aleph. Habo alachas mikol harayis hamuras b'teira b'mezit chayiv koros shenamar ki kol hasheyasa mikol ha'te'evis ha'elu v'nichlesu ha'nefoshes shneim. The says it goes on both of them. Habeil v'hanivelis v'nichlesu ha'nefoshes. So we learn out shneim. So in other words, it means both of them. Sai habeil v'sai ha'nivelis. I mean, the Rambam in Hilchos, the beginning of Hilchos Ishus tells us that all those that that the Torah in Parshas Achrei tells us Yechayev Koros for a bia, so they go into the gather of Arayis. That's what the Rambam. That's how the Rambam is magder. The Rambam tells us, he lists over there all the shnias, but before that he says that all those that are Chayev Koros that are mentioned in Achrei are called Arayis. So here he's going the other way, like he's saying Habo Alachas Mikol Harayis, which he called them Arayis in so they're Chayev Koros, and over here he adds that they're all Chayev Koros. Both of them are Chayev Koros. Shneim Habeil v'Hanivelis. In Hoye Shegigim is Chayovim Chatus Kvo. Chatus Kvo means as opposed to a carbon oil of there's certain chatois, there's 4 averas, where over there the din is that you bring it according to how much you could afford. So but a Chatus Kvo means that it's one standard Chatus regardless of how rich or poor you are. Chayovim Chatus Kvo. And V'yesh min ha'arayis shehu b'misas bezin yeser ala koros hashav b'kulam. So in other words, all the arayis, there's a chiyuv koros. And the male, so let's say if there's no Mrs. Bezin, for example, if there was no Edom Basra, so there's all Arayis, there's all Koros. But there are Arayis which also have a Mrs. Bezin. So it means when there's Edom and Asra, so then there'll be a Mrs. Bezin. Oisen Arayis sheyesh ba Mrs. Bezin, im hoyisham Edom Basra, v'lei pirshum imaseyam, is memisanesam miso hamurabem. So there's a musa called Mrs. Bezin. Lashon Rambam like Pirshim Masayim, which means bepashtos that even to know that bepashtos the hasro is kedem ha'maisa. Over here it sounds like it's bemsa ha'maisa, and there's Pirshim Masayim. You have to understand exactly because the Pirish is also a maisa avera. The maisa prisha is also a maisa avera. Nicht allein lassen in them. Halacha beis. Oisen ha'arayis sheyesh ba Mrs. Bezin im hoyu sham Edom Basra v'lei pirshum imaseyim memisanesan miso hamurabem. So the Lashon Rambam is pirshum maseyim, which normally you say you give Asra before the Maisa, and then they do the Maisa. They do the Maisa take the Dibur. Over here the Lashon Rambam is v'lei pirshum maseyim, which sounds like the Maisa they could be in the middle of the Maisa. So the question is, I mean, if they're in the middle of the Maisa, so the question is, so what's the chiyuv for? I mean, they should have been pirish, but there's a musik that the prisha itself is a ma'isa avera. That's a separate issue. Halacha Gimel. Vafilo hoya ha'ever Talmud Chacham. So the din is a memisin v'le malkim at shetir shemasra. So even the person of Talmud Chacham, so he knows that it's asur. He knows that such a thing is asur. Is nevertheless is a memisin v'le malkim at shetir shemasra. Why? Shlenitna asra b'chol mokim el lahavchin b'shegig l'mezid. And it could be that there's a tzad shegig. He doesn't know the mitzias. He knows the din, but he doesn't know the mitzias. In Gemara, the Pashtus Haloshon of Gemara, over there's a mandama that says that Talmud Chacham ain't tzarech hasra. That's the Pashtus in the Gemara. Talmud Chacham ain't tzarech hasra. Shalei nitna hasra elo lahavchin b'shegig l'mezid. So this Loshon is being used to explain why ain't tzarech hasra. And the Rambam brings it fakert. The Rambam brings it Talmud Chacham tzarech hasra because shalei nitna hasra elo lahavchin b'shegig l'mezid, which b'Pashtus it means that there is a tzad, because there could always be a tzad shegig. That's the Churah Pshat. Halacha Dalet. Harayas, so Nachamol. So the Rambam said there's the musig of Harayas. All those, the Harayas is chayv. For all the Harayas is chayv kares. All the Harayas is chayv kares, and there are some Harayas which also have a chayv misa. And the Rambam is going to enumerate those chayv kris, those Harayas which are chayv misa. Harayas sheyesh ba misas bezin, mehen shemisosim b'skila, mehen shemisosim b'sreifa, mehen shemisosim b'chenek. There's daled misas bezin. One of them is hereg. So there's no hereg. There's no sayif festus. There's no sayif b'negeya arayas. There's no such b'chal. The whole musig of hereg of sayif is there's only two avedas that's chayiv sayif. That's ira nidachas and a ritzech. There's no other avedas which are chayiv sayif. Kitzu, the arayas sheyesh ba misas bezin, it's possible there should be skila, sreifa, or chenek. Ve'elu shemisosim b'skila. Habo alimei, or v'aleshes aviv, or v'aleshes b'nei. V'hanekras kalosei. V'hashechiv m'zocher, that's hashechiv m'zocher. And v'hashechiv m'behema, or v'hisha ha'mevias ha'behema olah. So there's 6 avedas, nachamol. So there's imei, and there's eshes aviv, and there's kalosei, and then there's a zocher, and a sheikh and behema, and isha mivia behema. These are chayuvim skila. Halachei ve'elohin ha'aroyes shemisosim b'sreifa. Halbal basishtei b'chayishtei. Now this b'chayishtei is going on all the relations to the ishtei. There's 6 relations. To the ishtei is only this din that misosim b'sreifa is only b'chayishtei. If it's not b'chayishtei, it's only chayv krisus, and it's not chayv misa. Habal bas ishtei b'chayishtei, or val bas bita val bas b'no, which means her granddaughters, either her daughter or her granddaughters, either her granddaughter because it's her son's daughter, or it's because it's her daughter's daughter. Val eim ishtei, val eim ima, val eim avia, which means her mother or her grandmother, either her grandmother, the paternal grandmother, the mother of her father, or a maternal grandmother, which is the mother of her mother, and Va'bal Bitei, Valbaz Bitei, Valbaz B'nei. If it's his daughter or it's one of his granddaughters, either it's his granddaughter through his son or his granddaughter through his daughter. So the Kitzur, the Sreifa goes on either his daughter or granddaughters, or his wife's daughter or granddaughters, or his wife's mother or grandmothers. One of her grandmothers. These are, that's nine. That's misasim misreif. It's interesting that for your own grandmother is only a shnia. Just a point of interest. A wife's grandmother is arayis, and a person's own grandmother is only a shnia. A mother is chayiv skila. We learned it's chayiv skila, but her mother is only a shnia. Halacha vav. Ein lecha erva bechenek ele eshasish bilvad. Shenemar meis yumas hanev v'haneyefes. And the word meis yumas or miso amura b'terestam hi chenek. That's the rule. When it says meis yumas and doesn't say anything else, so then it's chenek. So nachamos. So we learned that there are arayas which are bekaris, and there are some arayas which is misas bezin, and they are the 6 which is beskila, and then there's the 9 that we mentioned which is besreifa. And now there's a Eishasish. The Imhoisa, which is Bechenek. The Imhoisa Baskein. However, an Eishasish, which was a Baskein, so here's special, different, is he b'sreifa ubeil lebechenik. So it's normally always arayas is the bail and the novellas have the same misa, but over here there's a special din that he is b'sreifa and bail is bechenik. Shnema ubas ishkein kiseich liznes ba'esh tisarif. That's one special din. V'mhois naira murasa, even though normally a shasish is bechenik, but v'mhois naira murasa is shneim b'skila. Shnema kisiya naira psula v'gemer uskaltem esam ba'avonim. And that's it. So memela uskaltem esam ba'avonim. So memela, so this achi of skila. Then the Rambam adds, although here it says clearly uskaltem ba'avonim, it says v'chol mokim shnema b'teira meis yumasu d'meim bom hareim b'skila. Whenever it says the lashon d'meim bom harezu b'skila, and that explains why there were the arayas, which the Rambam mentioned in the beginning, which are beskila, how do we know they're beskila? Because it says the mayim bam. So Mela knows, but again, Nair Maras, it's like a little bit, this is, the Rambam saying it Behamshach Nair Maras. By Nair Maras, it says clearly, it's Kaltam Esam Bavonim. Masha'enki and the other ones, it doesn't say clearly, so the Rambam is adding that wherever it says the mayim bam is beskila. Yeah. Shar Harayas Kulam is because Bilvad, V'ein Bam Mrs. Bezin, Lefichach. Im hoyusham edem basra is bezin malkanesim, because the rule is shekol chayvi krisis. Anything that's chayvi krisis that there's a lav on it is like is like. So bekitzer, all arayas is chayvi krisus. There are arayas which are chayvi misas bezin. There are the 6 arayas which are chayv skila. That's imei and eshes av and kalose and a zochar and maybe. A sheikh of behema, or maybe behema alav, that's chayiv skila. And sreifa is benigeya. There is bite bas bnei, and there's bas ishtei and bas bno and bas bita, and then there's aim ishtei and aim ima and aim avima, ima and aim ima and aim avima, aim avima. And then there's also another din of a normal Eishes Ish Bechenik. And now we're learning that there's also Eishes Kain is Besreifa, and also an Aira Marasa Shazinsa is also Saihi, and Saihu is Beskila. Halacha Ches. Habo al Achas Mechayvi Lavin Bemezit is Hu Leike Vehi. So they both get Malchus. V'im B'Shegik is P'turim Miklum. There's no. Habo al achas me'ashnias is bemezid is makanes and makas mardas midivreim. So there's a chiv makas mardas. So there's a chiv makas mardas if it's bemezid. Aval habo al achas mechayv yasa ain't leika, and there's also no makas mardas. Abavim hikois and bezin makas mardas kedei laharchik mino aveda or shus biyod. So it comes out that if a person is over on a shnia. So which is a din d'Rabbanon. So there's a normal thing for being over on a shneir is that's like a din arayis with Rabbanon. So that's a din that's the chiyuv makas mardas. Masha'enkin, someone that's over on an esa abo alachas mechayvi esa. So then so ein leika, he doesn't get malki, he doesn't get makas mardas unless this was special. In hiku esam bezin makas mardas. That's not the normal seder. In hiku esam bezin makas mardas kedei laharchik min aveda is a reshus biyodom. Tes onus poter miklum min hamalkes umin hakarban. So now there's a mezid and there's a shegig and now there's an onus. Onus poter miklum min hamalkes umin hakarban. Bein tzarich leima min hamisa. Shenemer v'lanayra lisasa dover. From there we learn out that an onus is poter miklum. Bamedvar mamurim b'shenenas hanival. Aval haboil ein liyonis she'en kishi ela ledas. So a boil, since en kishi ela ledas, so therefore by him is not shayches oinis, and therefore so even if it's be'enis he's chayiv because it's not shayches oinis because en kishi ela ledas. V'isha shetchilas biyasa be'enis v'sefer baratzim. So the tchilas abiyah was be'enis and the sefer was baratzim is also p'tura miklum. Even though l'chura the sefer was baratzim, so l'chura she should be chayiv for the sefer. So shemishehischel livel be'enis doch ein biyada shalei tirtza sheyetzer adam v'tiva kefeis alirtzes. So mainly, even though there was a ratzin and l'chura for that ratzin l'chura she should be chayiv, but nevertheless, since it's ef sheshalei tirtza. No, so in a ratzon you can only be chayav for a ratzon if it's ef sheshalei tirtza. Masha'inkin over here, since it's ef sheshalei tirtza, because the yetzer ha'adam keifa isolirtza is so mele she's potter. That's what it says here. Now, b'negei this din that a boil is ein li'oinus, there's a machlekes. The question is, when you say ein li'oinus, in oinus there could be two efanim in oinus. There could be a metzias the oinus, gashmis the oinus. You take someone, you force someone to do something, the gashmis, and there could be an oinus where a person is threatened with his life. That's another endeavor of oinus. So the marshal b'negei on oinus that a person is being forced b'peil mamish. So you say ein li'oinus because ein kishi elu l'das. Masha'inkin b'negei, if a person is being threatened with his life, so l'chura ein achinami. There's, in order for him to do it, ein kish elu l'das. Abul he was being threatened with his life. So Mela, he did it because of the threat. So the Maggid Mishnah says over here that l'peil mamish, the Maggid Mishnah learns that even in a tzir where he was being threatened with his life, nevertheless he's chayiv. Why? Because l'peil, since he's doing it, and that's a klol is the kashayla, when a person does something b'ainas, and really he also wants to do it. So he wants to do it. So Mela, when he's doing it, on one hand he's doing it b'ainas, on the other hand he also wants to do it. So if it's not for the ainas, he wouldn't have done it. But on the other hand, now that he's doing it b'ainas, he wants to do it. So in such a case, is there a p'tur of l'naira l'sasadava that he's potter? So on that he's saying, that since ein kisha l'das, so Mimela, the fact that he's doing it means he wants to do it. So even though he's being threatened with his life to do it, but on the other hand, so of course, if he wants to do it, so Mimela, there's no p'tur of ein psachidush. And the Chalkas Mechekik in Shulchan Aruch brings not like that. He argues, Tain is not like that. He says since Lepeli was being threatened with his life, so Memela, so how could it be Chayiv? He's an Einus. He has a P'tur of Einus because he's being threatened with his life, which is a close the Kashayla in the whole P'tur of Einus. When a person is doing something by Einus and he also wants to do it. But I'll quote upon him, that's what the Maggid Mishnah is saying. That's the Chura the Pashtus Alosh Rambam. The Rambam is saying that b'shenanas and avol abel alienis. Period. The Rambam is not saying up his only tziyur and alienis. There's no p'tur of alienis at all. Now the question is, that's the question. So on that, the question is over here. It says behemsha that isha shetchilasa be'alienis v'sefer baratzim. So it's potem riklum. So first of all, l'chura over here we see the chidush that for the hemsha chabiyah. No, over here it's tchilasa baratzim v'sefer b'alienis. So what would be the svara? The svara is she should be chayiv on sefer, which means even though the tchila was beinus, but on the other hand, the fact that she continued in the sefer, and that was beratzim, for that she should be chayiv, even though the tchila knows for the hemshech habiyah there's a chiyuv. That's also a psachidush. That for the hemshech habiyah there's a chiyuv. There's a chiyuv, like we mentioned before, b'negeya that like pirshim masayim, like pirshim masayim. So we're saying that for Lechura for the Hamshah she b'chayev. So we say no because ef sheshali lirtzes. So Lechura comes out that when there's an oinus and there's also a ratzon because ef sheshali lirtzes. So Lechura then she's potter because there's an oinus. So even though there was also a ratzon. So on that the Tzemach Tzedek talks about this. That Lechura on one hand we're saying that when there's an oinus and a ratzon, so the ratzon is mechayev, and over here we're saying that there's sayan oinus because ef sheshali lirtzes abulapel she's reitza. So you have to. The Tzemach Tzedek talks about this. He says over there the pshat is in this matzav she has to want. Whereas since what happened with Peil Mamish was a matzav that was against her will, she didn't have any control over it, and now she also has no control over shalei lirtzes because once she's nanas ef sheshali tirtza. So that's a matzav of ef sheshali tirtza. You can be mechayiv on that ratzon. The matzav of oinus you can be mechayiv, and the matzav of ratzon you also can be mechayiv because the matzav of ratzon was forced because of the oinus. Masha'inkin over there, even though l'chura he was being threatened with his life, if he's not going to want, but Vaistas, even though you have to understand, even though he's being threatened with his life, but Sof Kol Sof right now he's wanting. It's not ef sheshali yirtza. He's ef sheshali yirtza. Lepel is being threatened with his life. So this ef sheshali tirtza is a metzias the ef sher, and over there it's ef sher mitzad because he's being threatened with his life. And from this over here, he's chayiv for the ratzon. You have to understand, l'chura, if he's not going to be reitza, because he has a choice. In his mind, he has a choice. He's going to be killed. So Memela, he chooses lirtzes in order not to be killed. I'll quote upon him. That's an issue. it's a shayla. It's a Masari talks about it. But I'll call upon Nochamol. On oines is potter. That's what the oines is potter. The Nile is asadova. The Rambam says that ain't by our oines, by the boil is no shaychus and oines. By the boil is not shaychus and oines. Because since in kishel das, so Nile is not shaychus or oines. When we get Isha, is shaychus and oines, and even if at the end it was a rotzen, so Memela Lechura there's a svara that she should be chayiv. But from deswegen, since this rotzen came on by eines, because Iaf Sheshloi Tirza, so she's not chayiv on the rotzen. That's what it says here in the Lashon Hara. Halacha Yud. Hamachnis reisho ator belvad hu anikre ma'ara. Meloshen es mekeira hera. That's like tchilas abiyah, and the Rambam is going to say that's called a biyah. Now the Lashon Hara over here is a reisho ator belvad, which sounds like not the kol ator. Bring the Ramahara brings over here from Pirsha Mishnayos that Bamisid means the Atorah. It doesn't mean, even though the Lashon is Reisha Atorah, but it means the Atorah, and he brings also from Neidim Yehuda that it means Kol Atorah. I'll call upon Hamachnas Reisha Atorah Belvad Hu Anikra Ma'ara Miloshin Es Mekeira Hera Hamachnas Kol Eiver Hu Anikra Goimer. Now Ubechol Abiyas Asuris Echad HaMa'ara Ve'echad HaGoimer Afal Pi Shalei Heitzi Shekva Zera. So notice, first of all, it's two in yon. First of all, is Echad HaMa'ara ve'Echad HaGemer. So he doesn't, as long as he was Machnas Reisha HaTorah, even though he wasn't Machnas Kol Eiver, so that's considered a Maisabiyah. That's number one. And secondly, also, there doesn't have to be a Hitzis Shikva Zera. That's also called a Machnas Biyah. The one thing has not, that being Machnas, the Maisabiyah has nothing to do with Hitzah Shikva Zera. Ba'aval Pi Shepirish V'Ligamar, Kiven shehichnas reisho atorah nischayvu shneim misas bezn eikoris emalkus emakas mardas. Yeah, ve'echad abal erve kedarka ve'echad abal shalei kedarka. Mishiyareba when once there's hara is yischayvu shneim misa eikoris emalkus emakas mardas. Ben sho yishechvu ben sho yaimdim alachnosas ha'atorah hu chayv. Over here the lashon zachnosas ha'atorah hu chayv. Yeah, halacha yud aleph. Kol habo bi asura b'lei kishui, ela shoya ever sholei meduldul k'mei ever amesim k'gein achela. So there was no kishui. Oy mishanelet kach k'gein srischama. So memela, so he's not shaychus to have kishui. Is afal pi shehichnes is ever biyadei. Is nevertheless any chayev lei koretz v'lei malchus. Ve'ein tzarich lei mamisa she'ein zu biyah. So the gather of biyah is only a biyah with an eva that there's kishui. Aval Pesel Human Atruma. This is an issue which is nivelat lepasula, so she becomes a zayna. So even though the chura normally bia is only a bia with an eva with kishui, but nevertheless over here legabi this din, the din is that if she was nivala, even with belay kishui to someone that's pasula, so she becomes pasul min atruma. The Minchas brings from Minchas Chinuch, the Ramah brings from Minchas Chinuch that hu adin she becomes asura lekein al tzazayna. Not only min atruma, she becomes asura lekein. Ubazn makan shnei makas martas. So there's also an inyan makas martas. As if someone was nivela lepasula lepasula. Halacha yud beis. Habo al erva min harayas kimis asik. The kimis asik means that he thought that she was, let's say, mutaris. He thought that she was ishtay, and lepel she was arayas. So that's a misasik. You know, just like by misasik b'Shabbos, he thought that he's picking up a tolush, and lepel he picked up a mechuber. So over here also he thought he was being ba al ishtay, and lepel he was ba lachesed. Habo al erva min harayas kimis asik. That could be one seer of a misasik. Another seer of misasik is that he's not aware of what he's doing. And those things were happening, and he wasn't aware. He was doing things without thought about it, but it just happened. Habo al erva min harayas kimis asik is avol pi she'ein kavanasi lekach is chayv. So there's a special din. The Gemara says that misasik b'chalov maray is chayv shekei nana. Since he was nana from the Yisr, so the etzem hanoah that's a mechayv. V'chein b'chayv yilavn u'bishnis. Now, when you get chayv yilavn, we'll go back to chayv yilavn shnis. So the din is misasik min arayis is chayv and al derez by chayv yilavn shnis. Aval habo al erva min harayis v'hi mesa. If she's mesa, she's not alive anymore. So that's poter miklum. That's I don't know the aval. I mean, it's like a completely different story. Now, there's a din of misasik that he's a misasik. The mesa misasik is chayav, and then there's another din that a bia with a mesa is not called a bia. Poter miklum The Ein Tzorech Lemer b'chai v'lav m'shu potter. Also, I don't understand what the Ein Tzorech Lemer is. Whereas the din is that a bia with a mace is not called a bia, not legabe iser, legabe iser, which is chayvim isis. Now there is a chayv v'lav. What's the Ein Tzorech Lemer b'chai v'lav m'shu potter? That's din number one. And then he says v'boal atreifa. Someone was boal atreifa, ishishachiv and behema treifa chayv. Whereas the fact that the behemoth is a treifa is legabi, macholas asuris, or legabi, the chiv ritzicha, there's a difference if he's a treifa or not. Masha'inkin beneged, this din of bias asuris, the fact that he's a treifa, he's a chay. Chayu, avu b'shasefi lomus mechelizah, ba'filu shachad b'shnei simonim. But as long as vadayin him mefarcheses, so after he was shachad b'shnei simonim, so he's vada yomus, but nevertheless he still has the din of chay. Unless it's yatis reisha, so then even though the pale is mefarcheses, but we say that it still has a din of mess. Say the behemoth adam. Knows once is yatis reisha, so even if the body is still mefarcheses, still has a din of mess. Has a din of a mess. So the Rambam said before that amasasik moarayis is chayav. The Mashas means he's chayav a korban chatas. Because the din is for a shegi, you bring a korban chatas. Masha'inkin and oinus, you don't bring a korban chatas. What about a mesasik? So you say, by a mesasik, you also bring a korban chatas. When he says, v'chein b'chai v'lav b'shnias, b'chai v'lav b'shnias, there's no korban chatas. And there's certainly from mesasik, there's no chiv malchus, or makas mardus, who is a mesasik. So what's the b'chai v'lav b'shnias? So the Kesef Mishnah says, it means that he has an oinish. He has an oinish min hashamayim. It's something which he needs a kapara for. The chayvi lav mushnias, you also need a kapara by a misasik. That's what it seems to be saying. Just saying, l'chura, there's a babusta mais, a shayla b'negeir isur d'rabanan. If someone doesn't isur d'rabanan b'shegig, if he's tzorach kapara, there's a famous if isur d'rabanan is a cheftzor, is a gavra. What's together isur d'rabanan? There's a famous nesivas. The Rebbe once spoke about it in Chutzzichas. It's also that someone eats something that's awesome with the Rabbanon. B'shegig, so the Nesivus writes that he doesn't need a kapara because there's no Isser in the chefts of the Isser the Rabbanon. It's only the Isser is not listening to the Eibishter, to not listening to the Rabbanon, or not listening to the Eibishter that told us to listen to the Rabbanon. But since you did it b'shegig, so you didn't do a Maise Isser, you only did you didn't do a Maise Isser. You only in those the Isser of the Rabbanon is not listening, and over here you did not listen because it was a shegig. So mainly you didn't do anything wrong. Because if a person does a Isser the Rabbanon the shegig, so the Nesivus seems to say that he didn't do anything wrong, and that's why in Tzorach Kapar. That's what he says. And the Rebbe brings out from the Alter Rebbe in Perich Ches Tanya that over there he writes that if a person ate something that's treif shalev b'leiheda and even l'shem shamayim, and the Alter Rebbe writes clearly v'afili Isur d'Rabbanan. So that's sholish klippus atmeis legamri. So we see from there that the Alter Rebbe says that even the Isur d'Rabbanan has a din of sholish klippus and memela, so it can be oil l'mayla. So the Rebbe brings out from there that the Alter Rebbe names on the pshitus that the Isur d'Rabbanan is a chefza. Al kol panim here we're talking about shnias. Shnias is the Isur d'Rabbanan. And Kesef Mishnah is saying that by a misasik, which is certainly a shegi, even more than a shegi, he's a misasik. And nevertheless, he needs a kapara. So l'chura, it's clear that even Isur d'Rabbanan is a Isur chefza. I'm just saying, l'chura, you can bring a raya from this Lashon Rambam, that the Rambam says, v'chein b'chai v'lav mushnias. So we see that even Isur d'Rabbanan is a Isur chefza. L'chura. Halacha Yud Gimel. Kol isha asura me'elu, im hoyse b'shol shana v'yemechot v'mayla, is if she was already 3 years old, and she was a full 3 years old, is godel habol chayimisa ekoris imalkis v'hiptura miklum, because she's a ktana. Ellen ken hoyse gdela, unless she was a gdela. But no, if she was, in other words, if she was from 3 years and up, so she's potter unless she was a gdela. But if she was less than 3 years old, full 3 years old, is a reishneim pturim, because she ain't biyoseh. A gather of a bia is only if she's a bas sholish shana v'yemach. V'chein, the other way, isha gdoila shebol le'akotten is imhoye ben tesha shana v'yemechad v'mayla, so he chayev es koris imisa imalkis v'hu potter if he was a cotton. V'imhoye ben tesha shana v'lamata, and if he was less than 9 years old, so it's not a bia, so mele shneim pturim. So B'kitzur, we're learning over here that in order for a bia to be called a bia, it's only if she's a bas shalish shana v'yemachad. And in order for him, for his bia to be considered a bia, is only if he's a ben tesha shana v'yemachad. Now lepel, if the bia is called a bia, so even though one of them is a gadol, the other one's a cotton, so the gadol is chayav. Masha'inkin, if it's not a bia, so they're both pot. Halacha yudalet. Haba'ala zocher, a heavy zocher alav, kivin shehera, im hoyu shneim g'delim niskolim, shenam ve'zocher l'sishkav. So we learn out ben shah yibel a nival by a zocher by side the bail and side the nival are both chayav skila. Now v'imhoya ben tish kot v'imhoya cotton ben tish shana v'yemechad v'mayla zeh sheba'olav. You're saying haba'ala zocher. If this zocher was a cotton which was ben tish shana v'yemechad v'mayla, oy hevi olatzmei, or the person, the zocher which we said before, haba'ala zocher a hevi zocher olav. If the zocher which hevi olatzmei was a cotton ben tish shana v'yemechad v'mayla is niskal, so the person which was the Baal HaZocher, or is Hevi the Zocher Alatzmei, even though the Zocher was a Ben Teishashan, was a cotton, so he's Niskal, Abava cotton potter. So now, since he's a Ben Teishashan V'Maila, so Memela is B'Yosik Bia, so therefore the Gadol, which was either Ba'olov, or the Gadol which was Hevi Oisi Olov, is Niskal, and Va cotton potter. However, V'Mhoya Zocher, Ben Teishashan Mipochis, so then they're both potter. So by a zocher, in other words, the din is that a zocher b'chlal the bias of a zocher ben teisha shana v'yemachad biasi bia. If he's less than that, ain't biasi bia. And over here we see that also legabi the din of mishkav zocher. So the din is that only when he's a ben teisha shana v'yemachad, even he's the nival. So it's also only when he's a ben teisha shana v'yemachad, only then is considered that the bia was a bia, and memela the boil is chayiv. He's potter anyways because he's a cotton. But the boil is also not chayiv if the nival was less than pentesha shana v'yemachad. For royal bezin lahakis hagodel makas mardus, fishashachav zocher, ba'aval pishul pachs pentesha. Memela, this godel should be given makas mardus, even though lepel there was no maisa avera, because lepel is not considered a bia. Halacha tezvav echad aboal azocher, aboal andregnus zerach zachruse chayiv. It's special than andregnus. It has simoni zachrus and simoni nakfus, and memela he has the chadin of a sofig ish, sofig isha. Nevertheless, there's a special limud that if a zocher was baal and andregnus, a baal and andregnus, and he was baal of derech zachruse, which means the derech the way you would come on a zocher, which means shalei kedarka, bia shalei kedarka. So memela he chayiv as if he was a vadi zocher. Because if he would have been on a keva, so that wouldn't be something to be mechayiv. It would be a regular bias isser, a bias nus, but it wouldn't be a something to be mechayev, a chayev skila. The chayev skila is for a zocher shabal a zocher. Masha'inkin over here, an andregnus, even though an andregnus is a suffix zocher, suffix nekeva, but legabi, this din is a zocher shabal andregnus. Derech zachruse is chayev. However, in ball of derech nakfuse is potter. Van tumtum is suffiku. The ficha chabal am tumtum. Oyel andregnus derech nakfuse is makanes and makas mardus. Aber lepel, there's no, it's not a chayav skila, because a tumtum is the chasofik zachar sachem the keva. So even if you abal a tumtum, derech zachruse, in other words, the derech that you abal a zachar, but it's a sofik mishkav zachar. Memela, so you get makas mardus. On the other hand, you're not chayav misa. Now there is an if abal and dregnes derech nakvuse is also chayav. Handregnes mutter lise isha. To say someone that's baal handregnes derech nakvuse is makanes and makas mardus. Aber since legabi mishkav zocher, that's what the Maggid Mishnah says. Legabi mishkav zocher. So handregnes has a din of a zocher, and therefore habal all of derech zachruse is chayiv. So therefore the Chacham said that handregnes is allowed to be lise isha. Again, the nesuin is only a nesui suffix, but lepel is allowed to be lise isha and to live with isha. Halacha tezai. Habo ala behema, shehevi behema olav, ishneim niskolim. Shenamar ubechol behema lisitin shchoftecha. Ben shirova, ben the person was rived the behema, hevi olav, the person brought the behema olav. Ve'echad behema, ve'echad chayiv ve'ef hakil b'skila. So if a person was bala behema or hevi behema olav, he's chayiv skila. And v'lecholak hakasav bebehema ben gedel lektana shema b'chol behema. Afilu b'yem lidos. B'negei ish, he has to be Matesha Shana v'yemechad. B'negei isha, she has to be Bashol Shana v'yemechad. Mashenkin b'negei behema, there's no dinim of how old they have to be. Afilu b'yem lidos. Abo ben kedarka ben shalei kedarka is kiven sheheraba a shehersa b'chayv. So if there was a bia together with a behemoth, regardless of how it was, so either way, there's a chiv of behemoth. Now the mice is the Rambam over here, just about Merkung. The Rambam says over here the din of abola behemoth, and he brings the pasuk b'chol behemoth lisit l'shchavtecha. L'chatchila, originally the Rambam brought two lavim, and Bemis and Sefer HaMitzvos also he brings two lavim. One shalilavi ala behemoth, and then there's another din, a pasuk, which is that a person shouldn't shalilishkav behema, which was mitzvah yud zayin, and the mitzvah yud ches shalitavi isha behema Allah. So in other words, there was a separate lav, like tavi isha behema Allah, and there's takatu psukim. There's two psukim, lisamed lifnei behema, and then there's the chol behema lisit shchavtecha. Over here, the Rambam seems to be bringing only one pasuk. We learned that a cotton, when he's a ben teisha shana v'yemechad, is biyosi bia, sai legabe, that if he's boil, and sai if he's nivel, he's only when he's a ben teisha shana v'yemechad is considered biyosi bia. Benegea isha also, only when she's a bas shal shana v'yemechad, only is biyosi bia. And that din is also negea to a behema. No, as a behema, there's no age, there's no din of age. A behema, afilu ben yoimei, is also, there's a din of a bia of a behema. But on the other end, legabi, the person that has the bia with the behema, so it's negay that the isha should be a bas gimel shana v'yemechad, and also that the ish should be a ben teisha shana v'yemechad. That's this halacha. Halacha yud zayin. Koton ben teisha shana v'yemechad. Shabo ala behema. He via olav, that he brought the behema olav, bia shlei kedarka, is he niskeles al yodei. Behema is niskel because lepeli had bia with adam, but who potter. Haya ben teisha shana mipachas is ein sekelus habehema, because lepel didn't have a din bia, because since the adam, the ish is pachas ben teisha shana v'yemechad. V'chen k'tana bas shol shana v'yemechad, she'ivia behema v'chaya ola, ben behema g'dela, ben behema k'tana, kivin shehersek behema, ben b'kedarka, ben shalei kedarka, is a behema niskelis, v'hi p'tura, because she's a k'tana. However, v'mhoisek and v'hoisek g'dela, ishneim niskelim. Because the pale she was hevia behema Allah. V'mhoise b'shol shana mulamata is ein behema niskelis. So just like if the cotton was a ben teisha shana mulamata, so is the behema is not niskel. So what then? If the bas was pachas b'shol shana mulamata, she wasn't b'shol shana v'yemachot. So then ein behema niskelis. Halacha yud ches v'chein hashechiv ma behema b'shgoga v'isha shevias ha behema Allah b'shgoga is eina behema neskelis al yodam. V'afal pisheim g'delim. But the pill, since the aveda was done b'shegig, so therefore the behema is not niskel for being part of a aveda which was done b'shegig. Which although, if the behema was part of an aveda that was done with a cotton or a ktana, if the cotton was mentesha shana v'yemechad, or the ktana was ben bashal shana v'yemechad, so then the behema is yen niskel. Agam the behema, the chorish is a ktana, or he's a cotton. So the Gemara says, that sofkul sov be'emes, the cotton, no, that's considered a takol. It was considered a takol. It's just that chos rachman alei, the teira has rachman, it's mela, they don't get killed, even though they did it in aveda, but they did it b'mezit. Even though a cotton, normally a cotton laktani would say that it's considered a shegig, so you say no, that there is a difference between the shegig of a godel and the mezit of a cotton. Mezit, a cotton and laktana don't get any onshim. But on the other end, legabi this din, that since lepel they wanted to do it, they hadn't zin to do it, so therefore the behema is niskal al yodam, because it's considered batakol al yodam, that the cotton or the knana did something b'mezid, even though they don't get nanish because chas rachman alei. Masha'inkin, if a person did something b'shegig, so that's not considered that batakol al yodam, and therefore the behema is not niskal. That's what the din is. Kol harayis kulam shoya echad gadol v'echad cotton. Is a cotton potter by Gadol Chayev, K'mesha B'yanu. Echad v'echad Yoshan, is a Yoshan potter. Echad Mezid v'echad Shegig, a Mezid Chayev, a Shegig Mevi Korban. Echad Onus v'echad Beratzen, Honus potter, K'mesha B'yanu. Knows each one is separate. We're done each one according to what he is. If he's a Mezid, he's Chayev. If he's a Shegig, he's Chayev Achatas. Whereas one has nothing to do with the other. One doesn't affect the other. Halacha Yutes. Ein ha'edim niskokim liris hamanafim sheheru zeh b'zeh. V'hichnis k'mikchil b'shveiferes. Mikchil b'shveiferes is when they would have something to put the dye on their eyes, so there would be like a certain pointer, and that pointer they would put into a bottle. So that's the mikchil in the shveiferes. So you don't have to see k'mikchil b'shveiferes. It's enough. Mishayiru esim dvukim zeim zeh kederech kol ha'be'elim. They see a tzir, which that tzir, the pastor is a tzir of a be'ilah. Hareil and the rogim be'iriyazu ve'enem Hashem elihera. When they saw this surah, although they don't see the actual be'ilah. Halacha Chaf. Mi shehuchzak b'she'er basar. Donen be'al pi ha'chazaka. Afal pi she'en sham raya brura shezeh korev. U'malkin, v'seirfin, v'seiklin, v'chenkin al chazakazu. You give all the ancient based on the chazaka, even though you don't have a raya brura, that's the mitzias. Ketzat. Harei shehuchzak shezeh choisei, ebitei, eimai, u'ba'al leo be'edim. Is harei ze leike, ein nisraf ein niskal. Aval pi she'en sham raya brura shezeh achesei, eimai, ebitei, ele b'chazaka b'vad. How do we know that this is the sister? That was the pashtus. They grew up. We knew that these two people were sisters. We know for a fact that these two people were sisters. That was the pashtus advarim. So that's the cheskas, that this was imei, it was bite, it was achesei. That's enough to consider her avade achesei, and memela she's nenash. Umaisa aval pishein sham raya brushes yachesei imei bite ele b'chazaka b'vad. Umaisa b'isha achas shebol Yerushalayim. V'tinik is murkev lo al ksefa, v'higdilosoi b'cheska shehubno, u'bo'ola v'hiviu l'beznus kalu. This is a woman and a child came. We don't know really. There was bepashtas. He would refer to the woman as his mother, and that's what. And she raised him as if. Umaisa b'isha acha shebasu Yerushalayim v'tinik murkev lo al ksefa v'igdilosei b'cheska shehubno. No, she raised him b'cheska shehubno. He would call her mommy, and she would relate to him and deal with him as a mother deals with her child. U'ba'oleh, and eventually it was ba'oleh be'viyu lebeznus saklo. Raya l'din zeh mashadona teira b'mekal aviv v'makiv aviv sheyumas. The Torah says that someone that's mekal aviv or is makeh aviv, he's supposed to die. Minayin lo noraya brurish is aviv. Ela b'chazaka, he's b'cheskas aviv. We assume that he's aviv. So memei lekach, sha'ar krevim is also b'chazaka. The din of sha'ar krevim is also b'chazaka. So no, just like we assume there's b'cheskas aviv, and we're done based on that of a mekal or a makeh. So al derazeh, but negei arayos, we also falozech on the chazaka. This Indian that. The reason why a person by Makal Aviv or Makeh Aviv is Chayev, even though how do we know that he's his father? So the answer is because he's Becheskas his father. It's Becheskas B'nei. That says in Yerushalmi. In Bavli, it says differently. It says the Gemara, the Sugya B'negea Reiv. How do we know that Yisamchin al Reiv, that we go bas a Reiv? So from the fact that it says Makeh Aviv or Makal Aviv, so the question is, how do we know that he's his father? So we have to come on to Reiv because Reiv Bilas Achar Abal. So the Gemara seems to be saying that we're going basarev, not basa chazaka. So the question is, how does that stem with this Rambam? The Rambam is saying that there's a musa called becheskas b'nei or becheskas imei, and b'negei arayis is becheskas, and over here also we see that it's becheskas. Over there it's more than becheskas. Over there it's because reiv bilas acharabal. So the Rambam brings from the some sefer that Hagufa, that there was Reiv Bilas from the Baal. There's a din Reiv Bilas Achar Baal. Of Hagufa, that the Baal was Reiv Bilas, that in itself is Becheskas, that's Reiv Bilas, that the Baal had Reiv Bilas. In other words, once we establish that the Baal had Reiv Bilas, is Reiv Bilas Achar Baal. But the question is Hagufa, that has to come out to Cheskas. I think that needs also further explanation. But I'll call upon the Rambam doesn't bring down the union of Reiv. The Rambam just says that the reason why Mekal Aviv, Makeh Aviv is because he's Becheskas Aviv, just like the din of B'negei Imei or B'negei other Arayas where it's Becheskas Achesei. So Memela, so that's you give Malchus or Misa even based on Becheskas. Halacha Chaf Aleph. Ish v'isha shebo m'mdinas hayam. Hu Eimer Zeisishti, Vi Eimer Zabaili, Im Hurzika Beir Shleshim Yem Shehi Ishte, is Hergen Allah. So if she's Mazana, so she has a din of an Eishasish. Again, she's Becheskas Eishasish. They came and they established themselves as Eishasish. Aval B'techa Shleshim Yem, Ein Hergen Allah B'Shem Eishasish. So you're not Hergen Allah. No, you don't get killed, even though he says she's my wife. She says he's my husband. Aber von deswegen Ein Hergen Allah B'Shem Eishasish. She has to become Hurzika als Eishasish. So Isha Shehurzika Nida B'Shchunisa. Amol, they used to wear special clothes al Tzanida. So the people saw her wearing these clothes. So Memela, she became Becheskas Nida. Is Baila Leika Lemishum Nida. Again, we don't know from any other source other than the fact that she's Becheskas Nida. Memela, nevertheless, that's enough for him to get Malchus. Now, Hamakani Leishtei, Vinistera, and then Uboy Dachot Veheit Nitma. So we learned that once a Eidachot comes and says Nitma, so she can't be Shaisa because we believe the Eidachot. And Bahoya Baila Koyin, so and she has a din of a zayna. Uba la acharkach. And this Cain lived with this woman acharkach after she was mekane leishte v'nister uba yidachot is areza leika alem shum zayna. So the Cain is leika alem shum zayna. Afal pi sheikra edus beidachot. Abekvar huchzeka bezayna. So in other words, there's no edus that she was really nivala. There's an eidachot shenivala. Even though this eidachot came after there was already Eidikinu Yastira, is vices the Rambam is learning that's not pshat. Eidachot has a new din mamish namonis like Eidus. Since it was Kino, like this, you could think that maybe since it was Kino and Stira, so Aglaim Ladover, so the Torah gave the namonis of Eidachot like Edom. So the Rambam is learning not like that. The Rambam is saying that Be'emes, even after the Eidachot, she's just Hurzika Zayna. And nevertheless, since she was Hurzika Zayna, so just like when she was Hurzika Achese, Hurzika Bite. So you give the punishments what's negate to this matzav, even though we don't know it, but even butter, it's only Hurzika. So Aldera's over here when there's a Eidachot after Kinu Yistir, it's Hurzika Zayna, and therefore if the Cain was Bola, so he's Chayiv Malchus. Now from the Rambam is clear that it's only if it's a Cain Bola. Masha'inkin, if it would be a Yisrael, Bola, it wouldn't be Chayiv Malchus. The Maggid Mishnah, yes, there's a din that Ishte Shezinsa Beratzen, so there's an Isser Lav to live with her. That's the Lav of Liyuchel Baila Rishon Loshev Lekachta. So Lechura, so why doesn't he get Malchus even if he's a Yisrael? So now that the Maggid Mishnah is Mechadish, that for this Lav of Liyuchel Baila Rishon, so the Lav is killed two things. The Lav is killed a case where a person divorced his wife, and then his wife remarried, and then he took her back. That's one. Magzik Grushasi Mishanisas. And then it's also Kel Benegeya of Ishte Shezinsa. So the Maggid Mishnah is saying that there's only Malchus for Magzik Grushasi Mishanisas and not for Ishte Shezinsa. That seems to be what the Maggid Mishnah says. And for whatever, because it's a Lav Shebeklo, it's not Negeya, but this Lav, even though the Lav is Kel both things, Sai Magzik Grushasi Mishanisas and Sai Ishte Shezinsa, but from deswegen for Ishte Shezinsa you don't get Malchus. Now that the kasha is the Lechuras of Mefurish Rambam. The Rambam says later on in Hilchas Yisuri Bi and Perik Yud Ches, Alderes in Hilchas Gerushin, that someone that was bo al Ishte Shezinsa is chayiv Malchus. There's Malchus for Ishte Shezinsa. There's Malchus for Ishte Shezinsa. So the Rambam brings from Kesef Mishnah that this din, Psachidush, that a person that's bo al Ishte Shezinsa, a person that's Baal Ishta Shezinsa's Chayiv Malchus is only in a case where he divorced her, and then he remarried her, and then he was Bola. So it's just like it has to be just like all the Yisuri Lavim has to be you married her and you were Bola. So over here also it has to be just like a Magzik Grushasi Mishanisas. Pshat is he was Magzik Grushasi, he married her, and then he was Bola. So Alderet is over here also. In order to be Chayiv for Ishte Shezinsa Malchus, in order the Lav is there right away. But in order to be Chayiv Malchus, that's what it says the Kesef Mishnah in Hilchas Gerushin. In order to be Chayiv on Ishte Shezinsa Tachtov, to be Chayiv Malchus is only if he divorces her, then he remarries her, and then he's Bola. That's what it says in Kesef Mishnah in Hilchas Gerushin. Lefiz they're verstandig. The Rambam over here is talking in a case where he was Bola. He didn't divorce her and then Bola. He was Bola. So in order to be Chayiv Malchus for being Bola is only if he's a Kain. If he's a kohen, he's chayiv alem mishum zayna. Even if he's married, zayna also you have to be married, but you don't have to remarry. Whereas he's married to her and he's bola. Masha'en kain, in order to be chayiv out the din of liyuchal bayla rishon is only if he divorces her and then he's bola. That's what it says in Maggid Mishnah. Halacha chav gimel. Ha'av she'amar biti zu mekudeshes ilazeh is afal pishu nema and v'tinosile because he's nema to say is bitin asat lishazeh. Aber im zin so einen eskeles alpiv. That nemonis is not to be mechayev that she imzinsa she should be neskeles alpiv. The fact that she said mekudeshes, the fact that he said mekudeshes lazeh. Achi yushu edim shenis arse b'fnei. Unless there's edim, mashenga if there's out edim, so then she's not neskeles. V'cheino isha she'amra mekudeshes ani eina nereges alpia. Achi yusham edim. Or he tugzak, or by both cases. Knows once it's tugzak, he said that kidashtia, or she says I'm married to him, and then they go ahead and they get married, and they're eishes ish bepeil. So it's no different than two people that came and that were 30 days in the city. So they're becheskas eishes ish. So here also, if they're tugzak, so becheskas eishes ish.